Our first presentation is Jeremy Bagalki, graduate student in psychology, graduate advisor, Dr. Jason Carter. And the title of his presentation is Prolonged Heart Rate Response Following Nocturnal Arousal in Healthy Short Sleeping Adults.
Hello, and thank you for giving me the chance to present some research that I am very excited to share with you all. As some of you may know, cardiovascular disease remains the leading cause of death not only in the United States, but across the globe. A recent CDC estimate concluded that approximately 1 in every 4 deaths within the United States alone occurs due to heart disease. Ample amounts of research have been conducted regarding the key role for behavioral interventions such as exercise, diet, among others. However, one factor that often goes overlooked is sleep quality. In response to heightened demands at work or school, adequate sleep is often the first thing sacrificed. However, recent literature has shown that this may in fact be a primary cause for cardiovascular dysfunction among other detriments. To this end, our current research project sought to assess how habitual short sleep may impact cardiovascular reactivity throughout the night. To do this, we separated a cohort of 35 individuals into those who received less than 7 hours of sleep, or short sleepers as denoted in the graph in the top left corner, and those who received greater than 7 hours, or normal sleepers, based on 7 days of at-home objective sleep tracking. We then had participants stay a night in our sleep lab, where we recorded sleep as well as heart rate throughout the night. Following this, we measured each participant's average heart rate response to spontaneous arousals from sleep measured by polysomnography recorded brain activity. We hypothesized that the short sleeping group would result in augmented cardiovascular reactivity to these nocturnal arousals. Partially in line with our hypothesis, we did not observe an elevated initial increase in heart rate, but we did see a prolonged heart rate elevation following arousal in the short sleep group. This indicates that those short sleepers were unable to sufficiently buffer their cardiovascular response to arousal, resulting in maintenance of elevated heart rate, as you can see in the graph in the top left section. This elucidates a potential mechanism linking short sleep to poor cardiovascular health. However, our research does not comment on the relationship direction. As you can see in the figure in the bottom right, we hypothesized that poor sleep and physiological hyperarousal are in a bidirectional relationship. By this, I mean that poor sleep may lead to heightened reactivity of the cardiovasculature, thus heightening the likelihood of further sleep detriment, initiating a vicious cycle. Ultimately, we believe this relationship underlies, to some degree, the compounding effect of poor sleep and cardiovascular dysfunction and the pathogenesis of cardiovascular disease. So, if you take one thing from this presentation, for your heart's sake, try to get some rest. Thank you.
Our next presentation will be by Shihua Brazil, graduate student in adult and higher education, graduate advisor, Professor Carrie Myers. And the title of her presentation is A Narrative Inquiry into Chinese International Doctoral Students, a Strength-Based Perspective.
People who don't know me well often ask, where are you really from? My identity as a Chinese American woman shades my commitment to advocate for Chinese international doctorate students. Today, I invite the audience to think about how would you feel like to be scolded for speaking your native language. Recently, a Duke University professor asked Chinese students to stop speaking Chinese. The incident spread quickly on social media and can negatively impact American universities' ability to recruit international students. Even more urgent is calling COVID-19 as the Chinese virus. This further encourages discrimination, hate crimes, and xenophobia against Chinese students. This led to my research question: how can Chinese international students use their cultural identity as strengths to succeed in American higher education? The common themes from my narrative inquiry study, which included the use of artifacts as a way to explore cultural meaning, is that students' desire to study in the US was driven by the international reputation of American higher education and a strong desire to find synergy in the two cultures. Let me highlight two artifacts that Chinese students carried to the conversational interview. The first one was a Chinese teapot. The student explained how the teapot really represented a way to navigate her doctorate journey, drawing on the meaning of tea as an essential part of her culture. When she is stressed out, drinking tea is a calming ceremony. When she is successful, drinking tea is celebration. Another artifact is the Szechuan peppercorn. The student drew on this essential Chinese seasoning as a symbol of her connection with other people in the community who gather to cook Chinese food together. It gives her strength and creates a home away from home. To bring it full circle, we have a long way to go in creating an inclusive environment for all students. Asking students to not speak their native language is an example of looking at students from a deficit perspective. Instead, my study argues that being bilingual is a strength, not deficit. The second language provides a second lens to generate multiple perspectives. The more non-Western that language is, the more we see new perspectives. Thank you.
Our next presentation is by Genesis Chavez, graduate student in Sustainable Food Systems. Graduate advisor is Dr. Wen Yuan Kuo. The title of her presentation is Innovation Toward Indigenous Food Sovereignty, Developing Native-Owned Lake Trout Products with Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes.
Have you ever let your mind to navigate about the ecosystems in the lake? Or how is this connected to our food heritage? If not, that is totally fine. I will share the facts related to it in this presentation. The Native Fishkeeper Inc. is a non-profit corporation at the Flathead Indian Reservation. Their work is to protect native lake trout species from the introduced predator lake trout, the photo in the screen. Numbers are alarming experts about the extinction of the native species. Therefore, the purpose of this research is to contribute to the restoration and sustainable management practices by supporting the environmental health of the lake, reducing the population of the invasive lake trout. This is tailored to culturally appropriate product development, which will help to relieve the cost of these practices and also will foster local economy. Following the principles of participatory action research, a pre-survey was conducted to determine tribal member interests in developing a native-owned lake trout product, followed by focus group discussions and subsequently consumer acceptance tests to determine the acceptance of our products on and off reservation. The pre-survey results indicated that Native members were interested in discussing nutrition-related issues and reconnecting with their food heritage. Focus group insights indicate the utilization of more native spices and to adjust the smoking of the lake trout towards more traditional flavor preferences. These discussions inspired the creation of the two recipes, fish skin taco, which recall on childhood food memories, and Baja fish taco, which embraces the utilization of non-native spices. Both products were showcased by two storytelling recipes. On and off reservation, panelists rated both products above 7.2 on a 9-point hedonic scale. The off-reservation group gave a significantly higher score to the story and concept of the fish skin taco over the Baja fish taco. These results indicated that non-native panelists have a better appreciation for the story of this recipe. Findings also suggest more opportunities for food product developers to contribute to the food sovereignty efforts in the community. This study is also moving forward to our next phase by studying the business model feasible for these products.
Our next presentation is by Alexandra Feigl, graduate student in Marriage and Family Counseling. Graduate advisor is Dr. Callie Decker, and the title of her presentation is early intervention providers' perceptions of collaboration in Montana.
One of my favorite quotes comes from Rachel Callender. She wrote the Superpower Baby Project. She says, as humans, we are all different. We all have strengths and attributes to be celebrated. Disability is not a deficit within a person, but shows up in the deficits in our culture and society that does not fully accept, encourage, and embrace humanity, no matter what it looks like. Families of children with disabilities experience many more hardships, loss, changes, and transitions than families of children without. Supporting these families is crucial, which is why programs were developed to provide equitable access and opportunities for families to feel empowered and efficacious. The IDEA provides programming for these children with disabilities from birth to increase positive overall well-being and outcomes for them and their families. This consists of early intervention, Part C services that serve ages 0 to 3, and Part B special education services that begin at age 3. In our large rural state of Montana, agencies are contracted with the state to provide support services to families of children with exceptionalities. These agencies hire service coordinators to provide family support and enhance collaboration with direct therapists, including occupational, speech, and physical therapists. These therapists are private and not contracted under the early intervention agencies in Montana, yet some families' services can be paid for under an agreed upon cost plan from the agencies. Due to the nature of our service model in Montana, collaboration can be extremely difficult as therapists and service coordinators are not really under the same roof. Because of this, there seems to be a disconnection in services for families. They report valuing their providers, feeling supported and empowered, but they are wanting and needing more. So we set out to interview these providers to see what barriers providers may be facing that are affecting family services. After interviewing therapists and service coordinators, or as they're called in Montana, family support specialists, across all regions of the state, we found that communication, building positive relationships, understanding roles, and teaming collaboration are all things needed to provide an enhanced connection between early intervention providers in the state of Montana. FSSs and therapists ultimately report overall satisfaction with their level of collaboration, but also identify the need for therapists to receive education about service coordinators' roles within early intervention. Additionally, these service coordinators and therapists describe wanting better communication, opportunities for joint professional development, different ways to better understand each practitioner's role within early intervention. It's important to share this work as it allows, different types of practitioners and those who coordinate professional development kind of insight into the strengths and areas for improvement, really to promote alignment with recommended practices, at a national level. Thank you so much.
Our next presentation will be by Sumita Garg, graduate student in Sustainable Food Systems, graduate advisor, Dr. Wan Yuan Kuhl. Title of her presentation is Fresh Market Potential and Value-Added Opportunities of Montana-Grown, Cold Hardy Small Fruits and Berries.
Montana's agricultural industry is primarily dominated by wheat and cattle. Owing to the harsh climatic conditions of the region, it further limits the community's access for fresh fruit. Now, whilst traditional fruit crops cannot withstand the harsh winters, cold hardy small fruits and berries such as haskaps, saskatoons, and dwarf sour cherries provide a promising opportunity for Western growers to diversify their income streams. As perennial shrubs, these can withstand the harsh winters, increasing crop biodiversity, providing early season blossom for pollinators, and resounding health benefits. Yet, the consumer acceptance towards these varieties is limited. So this study focused on evaluating the fresh market potential and studying future directions. Through conducting an at-home sensory evaluation and holding focus group discussions, the overall acceptance of the fruit and the opinions and attitudes of the fruit were studied. Consumers were recruited from Western Montana Growers Cooperative. Using participants from this program was desirable due to their profound interest in supporting local produce and fresh quality. Consumers evaluated 4 samples: haskaps stored for 2 weeks, saskatoons, and dwarf sour cherries. From the consumer sensory test, it was made clear that haskaps have an untapped fresh market potential. This is because they scored significantly higher scores for overall liking, purchase intent, and willingness to pay. From the 115 participants, effects of cluster separation were also noticed, owing to preference for dwarf sour cherries by one cluster and some age-related differences. In one of the clusters, consumers scored significantly higher scores for overall liking, purchase intent, and willingness to pay for the dwarf sour cherries than the other cluster. The same cluster had a significantly higher proportion of individuals aged under 44. The liking towards dwarf sour cherries is suggested to be driven by the higher Brix in the fruit, whilst individuals aged under 44 scored significantly higher scores for the 2-week stored HASCAP samples for overall liking and willingness to pay. Now, this may be linked to a significantly reduced titratable acidity of the 2-week stored HASCAP samples. Focus group discussions further agreed that HASCAPs have an untapped fresh market potential and are most preferred when consumed fresh. But Saskatoons and dwarf sour cherries require processing to improve their palatability. Now, this gives a pathway for future studies on how to use value-added product development to promote the growth within the small fruit and berry industry.
Our next presentation will be by Elizabeth Green, graduate student in Curriculum and Instruction. Graduate advisor is Dr. Sarah Pennington, and the title of her presentation is Elementary Pre-Service Teacher Knowledge of and Experiences with Dyslexia in the Classroom.
It is estimated that up to 20% of people are dyslexic. Dyslexia is a neurobiological learning difference which affects processes related to reading and writing. For students with dyslexia, it is crucial to receive direct, explicit, and systematic reading instruction. The consequences for not receiving appropriate interventions are severe because struggling unsupported with the skills most classrooms revolve around can lead to low self-esteem and poor educational outcomes. The amazing news is that individuals with dyslexia can learn to read. Because of brain imaging, we know that when they do, they're utilizing different parts of the brain than neurotypical readers. This is incredible. So who are the key players in ensuring this amazing process occurs? You guessed it, teachers. So it is important to know that teachers, just like many people around the world, hold misconceptions about dyslexia, which in turn directly affects student instruction. One commonly held misconception is that dyslexia only affects reading. This is false. Processing speed and working memory are affected, which can impact many areas. The most common misconception is that dyslexia is a visual issue, that individuals see text on the page backwards, flipped, or even moving. Not true. They see words the same as everyone else. These types of misconceptions affect identification and instruction. But what if we could stop misinformation before teachers even enter the classroom at the pre-service teacher level? Well, the first step in doing that is to identify what teacher education students know and have experienced about dyslexia, which is what my research seeks to do. In this current study, a survey instrument was developed with 2 separate scaled response sets to a series of statements about dyslexia, some true and some false. So far, 110 teacher candidates have taken the survey, and the results are very interesting. Results show that there are many areas where teacher candidates' knowledge and experiences are rooted in the research, and this is really encouraging. However, results also show that there are multiple areas where misconceptions do exist within the sample. For example, over half of participants agreed that simply reading more will improve dyslexic students' reading skills. And almost 67% of pre-service teachers were either neutral or agreed that dyslexia is caused by visual problems, which mirrors prior research showing this as the most commonly held misconception. Also important to note is that each participant exhibited some form of misconception related to dyslexia. So we can use this data to directly inform teacher education programs to fill in those specific identified gaps in pre-service teacher knowledge. This research is an exciting and important step in stopping the cycle of misconceptions related to dyslexia, so teachers enter their future classrooms prepared to teach all students.
Our next presentation will be from Ian Greenland, graduate student in psychology, graduate advisor, Dr. Jason Carter. The title of his presentation, Evening Binge Alcohol Disrupts Cardiovagal Tone and Baroreflex Function During Polysomnographic Sleep Stages.
Hello from the Montana State Sleep Research Laboratory. Sleep problems in the United States are skyrocketing, from self-imposed short sleep and/or insomnia-related symptoms, where we pose the question, does alcohol consumption before bed increase sleep quality? While a chemist may argue that alcohol is a solution, we argue that alcohol consumption is not the solution to any sleep-related issues due to alcohol dependence and cardiovascular complications. While you may actually fall asleep faster, which is why many individuals think they are sleeping better, the second half of sleep is often of poor quality and highly fragmented. This presents an important disconnect where nearly 20% of American adults attempt to cope with sleep issues by reaching for the bottle rather than seeking help from a physician. This is problematic, where repeated consumption of alcohol prior to sleep may actually in the short term improve sleep quality, but any potential benefits quickly, usually within the course of a week, are abolished as an alcohol tolerance develops. In turn, the alcohol dose will be increased to achieve the desired effect, which is another hallmark indicator of alcohol use disorder progression. Over time, this alcohol dose can approach that of binge alcohol consumption, which constitutes the drinking of 4 to 5 alcoholic beverages within 2 hours, where this level of alcohol consumption is associated with cardiovascular disease pathogenesis, like hypertension, and can contribute to poor nocturnal blood pressure dipping and augmented morning blood pressure from a nocturnal sympathetic predominance. In work from our laboratory, we have recently determined that cardiovagal baroreflex sensitivity, an index of vagus nerve activation and withdrawal at the heart, is reduced following evening binge alcohol consumption during non-REM sleep stages of stage 2 and slow wave sleep, otherwise known as deep sleep, and REM sleep, and was further perpetuated the next morning during a Valsalva maneuver strain, where you can see the augmented sympathetic activation during phase 2 blood pressure decrease in the bottom panels, outlined in blue, and an augmented phase 4 overshoot after strain release, likely from the previous increase in sympathetic activity outlined in red. This is of particular importance as REM sleep features oscillations in blood pressure and heart rate and dominates those early morning hours of sleep where cardiovascular events are most common. In addition, REM sleep often exhibits an increased cardiovagal baroreflex sensitivity presumed to offset those large oscillations in blood pressure, where the dampening effect of cardiovagal baroreflex sensitivity via evening binge alcohol consumption may contribute to morning cardiovascular events and hypertension escalation. Thank you.
Our next presentation will be by Joe Hicks, graduate student in adult and higher education. His graduate advisor is Dr. Tricia Seifert, and the title of his presentation is Anonymous Anomaly, Non-Resident Undergraduates on a 21st Century Land-Grant Campus.
Now, you're the next contestant on non-resident undergraduates on a land-grant U. All right. So while that might not be the same ring as Bob Barker, I found using The Price is Right, and more specifically the game of Plinko, as an instructive analogy in sharing my research with you today. I see some skeptical looks in the audience, but hear me out. The Price is Right serves as the standard bearer of the game show world, much like land-grant universities uphold a time-honored place and critical role in higher education and in their states. In recent decades, land-grant universities have seen a notable increase in non-resident enrollment, in upwards of 30% of the total student body. Clearly, the price was right, at least initially, for these non-resident students. However, research also shows these non-resident students depart these public universities at a significantly higher rate than their in-state peers. Interestingly enough, there is only a limited number of research studies that offer insight into what these non-resident students, who they are, and why they may stay or leave a given public university. That's like a game show host inviting a contestant up to the stage without taking time for them to share a little bit about themselves. After all, it is that human interest piece that captivates the viewing audience. Past studies indicate non-resident students bring potentially great value to a campus, including enhancing the academic profile, expanding diversity of perspective, and providing necessary tuition revenue. In an era of stagnating enrollment and continually declining state funding for state universities, taking time to get to know the non-resident studio audience is essential to ensure they remain for the final showcase showdown, also known as graduation. Accordingly, in my study, I set out to explore 3 questions centered on the non-resident lived experience, factors impacting their persistence, and their sense of belonging to the campus and community. MSU provided the ideal offsite studio location as both a land-grant institution and host to a significant percentage of non-resident undergraduates, and upwards of 50% for incoming freshmen in recent years. To put this in perspective, if Plinko serves as the all-time famous Price is Right game, MSU has become one of the most desirable non-resident destinations in the entire region. During my study, I worked with 9 third-year non-resident undergraduates in their host campus to gain a better sense of their story. In many ways, college can often feel like a game in terms of the many challenges and opportunities represented in this visual by the Plinko pegs that continue to alter the trajectory of their experience, persistence, and sense of belonging from one year to the next en route to ultimately goal of graduating. Having this opportunity led to a brand new car results, including their experience reflecting that distance from home was a challenge but not insurmountable, that financial concerns started the first semester and continued throughout. In terms of persistence, family was key, even from afar, particularly siblings, and that non-resident friend met during the first time in the campus really made a big difference in their overall persistence. In terms of sense of belonging, they all felt more than just a number, and that the outdoors served as a defining aspect. When it comes to implications, policy-wise, expanding non-resident mentoring and integrating outdoor curriculum both in the classroom and now holds promise. Also in terms of policy practice, individual transportation options for students and expanding family weekend opportunities are worth revisiting. And as credits begin to roll with the daytime programming soon to follow, I am hopeful that through this presentation, I was able to take this anonymous anomaly and help to make it an explained entity.
Our next presentation will be by Allison Hoffey, graduate student in exercise and nutrition sciences. Her graduate advisor is Dr. James Becker, and the title of her presentation is Coordination During Running with Respect to Internal Loading and Age.
Do you like to run? While I cannot say the same for myself, if you said yes, over 50 million Americans agree with you, and for good reason, due to its accessibility and health benefits. However, if you do run, there's a good chance that you have experienced an overuse injury like knee pain or tendinitis. Because of the high injury rates associated with running, a lot of research is focused on evaluating potential risk factors for those injuries. Many studies use discrete motion, like the bend in your knee, to evaluate injury risk. However, recent studies have shown that discrete joint angles are not predictive of running injuries. Instead, what if we looked at how your joints continuously move together? The ability for two joints to move together and create a specific movement is known as coordination. Take, for example, two running drills, high knees and butt kicks. Both involve knee flexion, but use different motions or coordination patterns to create that flexion. Coordination variability is the ability for our joints to utilize different patterns to create the same movement. Variability is inherent to running, and therefore may also be indicative of running injuries. If there's an association between variability and injury, it may also be linked to the tissue loading or forces that cause those injuries. This is the primary focus of my thesis. We address whether runners with less variability also experienced greater tissue loading. We calculated variability between the knee, the lower leg, and foot during running, as well as tissue loading of the patellofemoral joint and Achilles tendon. We found that runners with less variability had greater peak tissue loading, and runners with greater variability had less loading. This observed association indicates the potential role of peak tissue loading in linking variability to running injuries. While the establishment of variability as a potential mechanism of injury is imperative, it is equally as important to understand how variability may differ across age groups. Due to differences seen in injury rates, for example, more stress fractures in adolescent runners and Achilles tendinopathy in older runners. This was the secondary focus of my thesis. We compared coordination patterns and variability between adolescent and collegiate runners. We found that these age groups utilized different patterns to coordinate joint motion, and further, that adolescent runners had greater variability than collegiate runners. This may be, in part, a product of ongoing motor development in adolescence. Now, anecdotally, this makes sense. I mean, if you have ever seen a child run, it is often a bit wild and all over the place. Taken together, the results of my thesis revealed the likely influence of variability on injury and movement throughout the lifespan. Thus, we may continue to use coordination and variability to better understand how movement quality differs with injury or age. Thank you.
Our next presentation will be by Christiane Parrish, graduate student in community health, graduate advisor, Dr. Suzanne Held, and title of her presentation is Transforming Research Results into a Relational and Culturally Consonant Handout for Community Members, the Healthy Relationships Are Sacred project.
The Upsalagat Crow Nation is rich in family, rich in land, and rich in culture. Many of the Upsalagat people still speak their language and follow their traditional clan system. They also continue to carry on these traditions to the younger generations. Messengers for Health is an Indigenous nonprofit organization and a unique partnership between Montana State University and the Absaloga Nation. This partnership works to improve the health and wellness of the Absaloga people through community-based participatory research projects, while also incorporating Absaloga cultural values and teachings. Recently, the Messengers for Health Community Advisory Board expressed that there is a need to improve healthy relationships in the youth in order to prevent domestic violence. In response to this need, MSU and Crow partners began utilizing the community readiness model in order to learn more about what healthy relationships means to the Crow community and how we can successfully create a program for youth. It is very uncommon for researchers to transform scientific data into something that is more relational and meaningful to the communities that they work in. In addition to reporting the research results as we would to a scientific community, we decided that it was important to transform these results into something that was relational to the culture of the Crow people. This slide displays a sample of the handout that we created for the Crow community. This is a visually appealing representation that includes traditional Crow designs, colors, pictures, as well as phrases in the Crow language. In the handout, we share important components from our project, including why this program is being developed, what we have done so far, what we've learned, and what our next steps are going to be. We've also incorporated interview quotes from community members, as well as questions for feedback. It is crucial that we are bringing this information back to the Crow community because we value the knowledge, skills, and experiences of the Crow people and what they have to offer. It is important for the community to understand this information and to be actively involved in this project because we want to successfully create a program for youth to improve healthy relationships and to prevent domestic violence in the future. Thank you.
Our next presentation will be by Mallory Peterson, graduate student in community health. Graduate advisor, Dr. Elizabeth Rink. And the title of her presentation is Insight, Validity, and Truth from Youth Co-Researchers.
American Indian youth living at Fort Peck Reservation in Montana have one of the highest teen birth rates in the nation. If you've experienced teen parenthood or know somebody who has, you know how difficult it can be for young parents to stay in school, especially if you live in an environment with few socioeconomic resources. Working alongside members of the Dakota, Nakota, and Nakona nations, my research sought to explore the underlying factors that contribute to positive experiences of teen parenthood for students at Fort Peck. As researchers, you know there are many strategies to approach this question. But if you walk away from this presentation knowing one thing, I want you to know about the power of including adolescents as co-researchers in health research. Western research methods tend to separate subject and researcher to avoid bias, and generally there is good reason to do so. However, this type of research tends to ignore power dynamics and often perpetuates existing social inequities in research settings. To counter that, my research aims to democratize knowledge and equitably engage students in the research process by elevating them out of the position of subject and into the position of researcher. Teens are experts on themselves, and their insight into the barriers and facilitators to teen parents finishing school was revelatory. So how did we engage teens as co-researchers? First, we included Native students in the data analysis process. Using small groups, we presented students with the results of their own health data and asked them how they would interpret the results. This serves a couple purposes. This allows students to practice metacognition, that is, thinking about the way they think. For research into health behaviors, learning a student's critical thinking process in real time can reveal a lot of information about how young people are interpreting their own reproductive health risks and behaviors. This process also reduced the trust gap between myself, an outsider to the community, and the students. Iterative information exchange between the students and adult researchers helped validate research and uncover novel strategies to help teen parents stay in school. So what about the final product? How will the research work for these students to uplift them over the institutional barriers in the academy? Well, why not ask them to write about it? We included youth as co-authors in our final manuscript, which we are in the process of submitting to a professional health journal. These students are experts in their own experience of sexual health in a way that myself or any other adult researcher could never write about. Our student co-authors highlighted the truth. They filled in the gaps between questions. To get the full story, Western health research must push beyond the bounds of quantitative and institutional limitations. A logistic regression model can tell you a lot, but the voice of a single student can tell you so much more. Because of the youth co-researchers we worked with, their community is better prepared to support young parents toward academic success. And using this research technique, we hope to grow a new generation of bright young researchers that will contribute to a more equitable world of academia.
Our next presentation will be by Michaela Pitts, graduate student in community health, graduate advisor, Dr. Suzanne Held, and the title of her presentation is Community-Based Participatory Research and Sustainability.
Hi, first I'm going to start off by telling a story. There was a domestic violence program developed in the Crow community to help women find resources, support, and get the help that they needed. Women started to find out about the program, and they were finally excited about getting the help, the resources that they needed. But all of a sudden, the funding ended for the program, and the program disappeared and left the women with no resources, no help, or support. Sustainability is the ability to leverage partnerships and resources effectively to continue program services and strategic activities that result in improvements in health and well-being. This definition resonates with me because of my partnership with Messengers. For the past 5 years, I've been working with the partnership between Messengers for Health and Upsalo God nonprofit and Montana State University's faculty and students. Our partnership uses community-based participatory research, which means the university and the community works on all phases of the research process. There is very little in the CBPR literature about sustainability. What is needed is work on how these partnerships can develop sustainability in their community program. I want to apply this framework developed by the Office of Adolescent Health into CBPR programs. The steps are strategize, assess, lead, evolve, communicate, integrate, partner, and diversify. To summarize, it's important for CBPR programs to start and continue so that what happened with the domestic violence program doesn't happen in any other communities. It is important for programs to apply this framework developed by the Office of Adolescent Health from the beginning of the program to achieve sustainability. Thank you.
Our final presentation today will be by Stephanie Wilson, graduate student completing an individual interdisciplinary PhD, graduate advisor, Dr. Mary Miles. Title of her presentation, Let Lentils Be Thy Medicine.
Imagine you've just finished work. It was a long day and you're eager to relax. There's a strong temptation to pick up a ready-to-eat meal on your way home for dinner. You walk into the grocery and the smell of that $5 rotisserie chicken hits you. If you're tempted by the convenience and the smell, you're not alone. Americans are expected to consume over 950 million rotisserie chickens this year. But long before the rotisserie chicken became a staple on the American dinner table, plant-based protein was widespread and necessary. Ancient Romans relied on plant sources for protein as the meat supply was low and hard to store. Times have changed since then, including our ability to mass produce food and store it. And as times have changed, our diets have changed rapidly, a shift that coincides with the global rise in obesity and diabetes. Once common dietary staples were increasingly displaced by foods high in calories and lacking in nutritional quality. Current dietary guidelines encourage us to limit saturated fat, added sugar, and sodium intake and to eat more plant-based foods such as beans, peas, and lentils, or what we commonly call legumes. Lentils are nutritionally dense, meaning they contain little additional fat, sugar, and sodium while providing health-promoting compounds. Just one meal with lentils is known to lower the blood sugar response, also known as the glucose response, after a meal, and also lower the response of a hormone called insulin, which controls our glucose levels. When insulin is unable to manage your body's glucose effectively, we have insulin resistance, and this can progress to type 2 diabetes without careful management. However, the effects of regular lentil consumption on insulin resistance and blood glucose control are not well studied. So to address this, we recruited overweight and obese individuals and asked them to eat either turkey or lentil-containing meals during lunch 5 days a week for 8 weeks. We provided a white bread meal and collected blood glucose before and after 8 weeks to assess changes to blood glucose and insulin responses. We wanted to know if the regular addition of lentils through just one meal a day could improve blood sugar control. We found from our study that participants who ate lentils midday for 8 weeks had lower average insulin responses than participants whose meals contained turkey. Participants who ate turkey-containing meals showed increased insulin resistance after 8 weeks, a finding that was not shared in the participants who ate lentil meals. Our study results suggest that regular lentil consumption through just one meal a day may help more at-risk individuals improve their insulin responses and slow the progression of insulin resistance. So, the next time you're in the grocery store and considering what to purchase for dinner, please consider plant-based protein like lentils. After all, they could be the medicine that we need. Thank you.